Everybody, welcome to Jacob's Quest, and today, or at least back on Friday, I saw Marvel's Eternals, the 30th, I believe, Marvel movie. This is going to be a full spoiler review, so obviously if you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend you watch this before I start talking about things, because there's a lot to unpack here, a lot of lore, a lot of things that I think are already being spoiled across the internet. So yeah, go ahead and watch this before you watch this. So also I'm going to talk about my negatives before I go into my positives, because I have a bit of criticism with this movie, as many people do, I think, but also I have a lot of positives. So this is definitely going to be the most divisive of all the Marvel movies. You know, everyone's been talking about the Rotten Tomatoes score. The critics have definitely been harsh against this movie, and I guess they have their reasons. I definitely have some of those same criticisms, I think. But as a Marvel fan, as someone who's invested in the lore, invested in the story of the overall franchise and whatever their future plans may or may not be, this movie opens a lot of very exciting avenues. So I'm gonna go ahead and talk about my negatives first. And my negatives, one of the main ones, I think, mainly pertain to overall, this is the longest Marvel movie, and it does feel like there are at least 20 minutes worth of stuff that they, I think, very easily could take out of this movie, and it would not affect the plot. It would not affect anything about this movie at all. Firstly, being that there are so many characters in this movie, and I think they easily could have taken 2 or 3 out of this movie and it wouldn't affect anything. And they're all given their own slow, quiet moments. They're all, given these character interactions, character building stuff, right? Which normally that's a good thing, but because there are so many of them, this movie at times feels like it kind of grinds to a halt, and we're here with these quiet moments. And I was sitting there with my girlfriend, and she leaned over and told me, this is moving so slowly. I need this to hurry up. And I see where she's coming from, because yeah, there are definitely parts where it's do we have to have this in the movie? Do we absolutely need another quiet moment where someone is unsure of what to do and unsure of what's right, and they have to sit there and have a motivational pep talk, and then they, it's we can probably, if not delete this entirely, at least cut this up and all right, just come on, let's go. So I do feel that is one issue. Another major issue for me is that, throughout the trailers and all the marketing, we've seen these deviants, these creatures that they were brought here on Earth to fight. And throughout the movie, and this was very much on purpose, they are presented as if they are the main bad guys of the whole movie. They are the main antagonists of what's going on and what the Eternals have to get together to stop. And that's fine on its own, because it works for the big twist, being that Ikaris actually let them free to serve as a distraction, just so that way the Celestial, who is inside of the core of Earth, can be born and basically destroy the planet in the process of being born. The main thing, the problem with this is that they did this weird thing where one of the deviants, who was absorbing the abilities of the Eternals that he killed, was becoming more and more humanoid, and he started talking a little bit pretty late in the movie. Actually, he started talking, and he, you kind of think okay, he's gonna be the main obstacle they have to get past in order to stop this, right? And this is before the twist is revealed. And he, because of the twist, he ends up being pretty meaningless. He shows up in the third act in the middle of their fight, because the whole group, most of the group, has to fight against Ikaris, who is their Superman stand-in. So it's a pretty awesome fight. But then you're oh, that's right, this deviant guy is here. I completely forgot about him. And then you think for a minute, oh, maybe he's gonna team up with the rest of the Eternals to fight Ikaris. And that's kind of a good twist of oh, these things we thought were just monsters, they end up helping us save the planet against Ikaris. But no, he is still just a monster that Angelina Jolie goes off and fights in a cave while the rest of the group tries to fight Superman. And the whole time you're like, the whole Celestial being born, that is a much bigger threat. That is the much bigger plot line that's happening here, while Angelina is fighting this monster in the cave. That why is he talking? What purpose does this serve? You know, him being sentient and humanoid, it didn't end up meaning anything. It didn't add anything. You know, so it was just really bizarre that you could cut so much of the deviant stuff out, especially with this walking talking deviant, because it didn't serve the plot or any of the characters in any way. You know, if they had made it so that, oh, the sentient talking one decides to help the Eternals save the Earth because they also don't want to die, that would make sense, and then it would feel like that served a purpose. And it's like, oh, you know, hey, our enemies, just because they look like monsters, maybe they're not monsters, you know, that kind of thing, right? Like, okay, there's something there, but they didn't do that. You know, so that was a confusing decision, and I feel like that was maybe an earlier draft of the script where it's like, you know, maybe the deviants were a bigger part of this and then they just got rid of that at some point. But, you know, this talking deviant showing up in the third act feels purposeless now. So I think that's, you know, a major thing against this. And I think this is kind of what most critics have a problem with, is that, like, there's so much happening in this movie and a lot of it feels like you could just like snip it out and it wouldn't change anything. So the deviants and a lot of the slower talking parts, I feel like you could kind of easily take out and you wouldn't lose much at all. Or at least, you know, the talking deviant, you could cut that out of there. It wouldn't change anything. It didn't do anything. So I think that's definitely one major negative. Another negative that I do have about this is that some of the character decisions don't entirely make sense for me. So for example, their big plan to stop the Celestial is that they all have to join minds. All of the Eternals have to join minds together to become powerful enough to use a power on the Celestial that's being born and try to put it back to sleep. Now, they're all in the middle of this fight. Ikaris is trying to stop them. They're all fighting Ikaris, and Ikaris has the opportunity to stop Sersi from doing this, but he decides he loves her too much to stop this, and so he ends up joining their big hive mind, giving her the ability to stop the Celestial from being born, which, you know, Ikaris was fighting to let happen this whole time. But then, and this is where the confusing part sets in for me, then Ikaris is so sad about what he did, I guess, you know, because he did kill their leader, so I guess he's sad about that. And then he decides to fly into the sun. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't, you know what I mean? He was fighting against them, and then he decided at the last minute to help them, and then he decided to kill himself by flying right into the sun. And it didn't come off as like a dramatic moment, I guess. A lot of people in my theater, I think, were just confused, like, as to like, wait, why did he do that? What happened? You know, so I feel like some of the editing there might have been a bit wonky or just unclear as to like what is happening inside of his mind, because, you know, I can understand if he's like, oh, you have to just kill me because I lost my purpose, you know, like we don't have our meaning anymore, you know, and he's just so devout to the Celestials that like he feels like his life is purposeless, you know, but he doesn't say any of that. He just goes off and then he's dead. So I was like, okay, kind of weird and wonky there. You know, so just there are some things wrong with this movie, and I can definitely see where the critics are judging this, you know, and I think that's my main thing, is that like, if I were to take this movie completely in a bubble, stand alone, judge it by its own merits, then I would probably be like, oh yeah, it's pretty messy, especially in the third act, and there's some questionable decisions that were made, and I feel like the script got chopped up several times during production, right? However, because this is the 30th movie in an ongoing cinematic shared universe, I kind of feel like it's really unfair to act as if this is a bubble, to act as if this movie has to stand on its own, when that has not been the case for Marvel movies in like a decade. You know what I mean? Like, we're at this point with Marvel where it's like, if you go into a Marvel movie and you're like, well, this one movie didn't do this or this and it did this wrong, it's like, yeah, but 5 movies later, this is all gonna make a lot more sense, and it's all, you know, like, I don't know. And for me, it just feels like if you've been with Marvel this long, you should know that none of this is in a bubble. All of this celestial stuff, all, you know, and we're gonna get into my positives here, but all of the lore and all of the stuff that they built up in this movie and maybe didn't entirely explore, it's because this is what's happening moving forward. This is the next 10 years of Marvel, you know? Like, it's all building up, it's all adding to everything that's happening. And you know, and this brings me to my first major positive, is that, like, if you are a fan of Marvel movies, if you are like highly invested in the lore and the history and everything and how this all works together, this is probably one of the most important Marvel movies as far as like lore is concerned, you know? So despite how messy it may be, the stuff that they talk about in here, the stuff that they introduce, the creation of the universe and the Celestials and how all of this relates to each other, this is going to end up being one of the most important movies moving forward, because I can tell you now, anytime we go to space and anytime like brand new high powered god level stuff is introduced in the Marvel universe, it's all going to be coming back to reference things that were introduced in this movie. And so like if you're heavily invested in Marvel and you like are really deep into this nerdy stuff, this is very, very important. And I think that's probably one of my biggest positives. My biggest takeaway is that, like, oh, we're going to be talking about this, you know? So like other people are judging this movie, you know, as a standalone movie. It's like, you know, how is the pacing? How is the editing? How is this and that, right? But for me, it's like, okay, but what does this mean for the rest of Marvel? What does this mean for the multiverse and all these other dimensions that they've been introducing? And all, you know, like, that's what I'm interested in, you know? So for me, this was like, okay, this is very important and really cool. Now, that's like my first major positive. My second major positive, I think, is, well, honestly, a lot of the characters work. Some of them maybe not so much, but a lot of them do. You know, I really love Kumail Nanjiani's character. I hope he, you know, some of them were taken off by a Celestial because they ended up saving Earth, and this main, I forget his name, Arishem? Is it Arishem? Am I, you know, the creator of the universe, this Celestial, he ended up taking some of them, and he's like, well, I'm going to judge humanity because you decided humanity gets to live over Celestial, so I'll judge them and see if they get to live. And he took them away. And so they're going to come back probably in Guardians or maybe in Thor or somewhere. They're definitely coming back somewhere. And then you have our other Eternals who are in a spaceship, their spaceship, and they come across in a post-credit scene none other than what's his name? Star Fox, Eros, brother of Thanos, Prince of Titan, you know, and it's played by Harry Styles. I'll be honest with you, I don't really know who Harry Styles is. I know he was like in a boy band or something, and a lot of people on the internet seem really excited, so I'm like, okay, he's somebody, I guess. That's just the truth. I don't really know who this actor is, but the idea that the brother of Thanos shows up, that's where I'm getting excited. So I'm like, okay, the brother of Thanos, but he's also an Eternal, so that means Thanos was he an Eternal? And you know, like, all kinds of questions start getting brought up. And I know that in the comics, Thanos is like half Eternal with like a deviant mutated gene, but is that the case in the MCU? Because so far in the MCU, they were presenting Thanos as if he's just an alien from a planet called Titan. But, you know, they're kind of mixing that up now. So a lot of exciting stuff is coming from this movie, a lot of really important things. And, you know, like a lot of Marvel movies, it's like, okay, this thing is setting up the next thing. And I know that that's kind of a criticism from some people, but I still love that. I love that you go to a Marvel movie, you get introduced to all kinds of new concepts, and it sets up the next thing that will introduce even more concepts. Because for me, this is all just a giant TV show. This is just a TV show. This is not individual movies that I'm judging on their own basis, because they're so interconnected at this point, and they're all setting up the next thing that's gonna involve this other thing that's gonna, you know, like all mixed together with the Disney Plus shows, and it's not individual movies at this point. You know, I know technically it is, but like it feels wrong to judge it by that basis now. You know, it's like, am I gonna pretend every episode of Game of Thrones is a brand new thing? It's like, no, it's all episodes of the same TV show. That's basically what we're getting here. So I just have a lot of great things about this. I came out of this movie with like really happy as far as the things that they introduced, the things that they set up, and a lot of the characters I did really like, and I hope we see later. I don't know if we're getting an Eternals 2, because this group is now, you know, half of them went that way, half of them went that way, and the other third of them are dead, you know. So it's like, I don't know how many we're actually, you know, if we're gonna get an Eternals 2, or if we're just gonna be having Eternals show up in various places. So yeah, I love a lot of the things that happened here. The other post-credit scene, so the character played by Jon Snow, I don't remember his name, but Jon Snow from Game of Thrones, the character played by him, he was introduced in the beginning of the movie. He was not in the movie itself as much as I thought he would be, or maybe he probably should have been in the movie more, but he was a really likable character. And they went on about like, oh yeah, my family has like this dark past and this history, and he was about to go into it, but then she got kidnapped, Cersei did. And then the post credits, he's about to open this sword. It's the Ebony Blade, which, you know, I only really know because I've heard YouTubers talk about it, but they mentioned it earlier in the movie, like, is that the Ebony Blade? It's like, no, this is the, you know, this is oh god, King Arthur's sword, I forget, Excalibur, yeah. Anyways, he's about to open the Ebony Blade, which I think is sort of a symbiote related type thing that is used by this other guy to kill gods. I don't know how all that's gonna work, but he's about to open the Ebony Blade, and then you hear a voice off screen saying like, are you sure you're ready for that? And you know, the second I heard it, I was like, okay, it sounds kind of like Jeffrey Wright, but why would the watcher be saying this? And then I looked it up online, and I was like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. It was Mahershala Ali as Blade. So that an off-screen voice was our first appearance of Blade in the Marvel Universe, which, you know, Blade is one of the things that they cast him, but they did not like announce a release date for his movie, I think. So I don't know if we are still waiting on like, when's the Blade movie coming out, but Blade might actually be a cameo character that shows up in other projects first, before he actually gets his own movie, which, hey, that's still pretty cool. I mean, I'm still waiting on that, so that's gonna be pretty exciting. So yeah, I guess my big takeaway from this movie is that, like, while it's messy, while yes, the third act is pretty messy, it's kind of chopped up, some of the character motivations at the end don't entirely make sense. You know, they let, you know, Sprite literally tried to stab her, and then, or no, she did stab her, and then they're just like, yeah, we'll let you be human, we forgive you, you can hang out with us, we're still cool. You know, like, it's like, okay, I guess, like, you're just cool like that. She literally tried to murder you, you know. So there's some character stuff that doesn't entirely make sense for me. It feels like maybe they didn't really have the third act entirely nailed down as to what they wanted to do. The deviants kind of turned out to be nothing, like really just fodder for action scenes, and then the talking deviant ended up going nowhere, and then he died. So I was like, okay, kind of wasted runtime on that, I guess. But I walked out of this with so much like lore and nerdy stuff that I want to break down and think about and be like, okay, how does this match up with the Guardians and the Asgardians, and then what about Peter Quill's dad? He said he was a Celestial. Was that true, or did he just think he's a Celestial? I mean, his brain was inside of a planet, and the Celestials grow inside of planets, you know. So like, I walked out of this movie with so many like interesting questions to think about, the implications of like the larger Marvel universe, that like I had a great time, you know. And I think that's my main thing, is that like, while I acknowledge the movie itself has plenty of issues, the things that it brought with it is so like dense with like lore and franchise stuff that like I can't help but be entertained by this, you know? And so I think that's my main thing, is that like while the critics I think were judging this movie as a movie, which, you know, to be fair, that is their job, you know, like they're supposed to be judging this movie as a standalone movie on its own. As a Marvel fan, I'm judging this movie based on like what it brings to Marvel, you know, what it like introduces to Marvel. So whereas, you know, for example, the Black Widow movie, it didn't bring a whole lot of new things. It introduced some new characters, but ultimately it felt like it was tying up loose ends that really didn't need tying up. It didn't really matter. It didn't introduce that much. The most it did was introduce a couple new characters, and that's it, right? It was like, okay, whatever. This movie, while it may have been messy, it brought so much with it, you know? And that's where it's like, okay, that's a major positive for me. So anyways, yeah, that's basically my takeaway from this movie. I imagine this is going to be pretty divisive, and a lot of people who are like, you know, film analysts who are like, oh, this movie's messy and garbage and blah 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 blah. For me, it's like, okay, but the Celestials and the Eternals and Blade and Thanos and you know, like all of this like interesting shit, right? Like that's, you know, it's like the movie itself can be a messy whatever, you know, but all this other stuff that kind of matters more to me almost, you know. So I don't know, I'm not sure how. I think this movie is going to age well as it moves forward with the franchise, as more entries in the franchise kind of like reference like, oh well, you know, the Celestials are out here doing this thing and they're out doing this to other planets, and more Celestials are being born because of this, and now we have all these Eternals on different planets, you know. Presumably we have who knows how many Eternals out there doing the same thing on other planets. How many of them are free? What's up with Thanos? You know, it's just so many great things that came out of this, you know. So I don't know, that's my thing, is that like I think this movie, and that's why I kind of made this tweet where I was like, I think critics and general audience members are looking for different things when they watch some movies. Critics are judging movies based on their, you know, their technical aspects, you know, and that is their job, you know, to critique the artwork of the movie and the technical, you know, all this stuff of the movie, you know, the editing and the pacing and the sound and blah blah blah. But an audience member, some of them just want to be entertained. Some of them want to have like these crazy new things introduced into their favorite franchises, right? And that's what this movie gave me, you know. Yeah, it's messy. Yeah, there's a lot of questionable stuff in it, but it brought so much with it, you know. And I can't help but be like, you gotta watch this if you're a Marvel fan. You know, if you're like invested in this, then this brought so much awesome stuff, you know. So anyways, those are my thoughts. Those are my opinions on Eternals. There's plenty of stuff to criticize, but at the end, I do not care about the technical aspects of this movie nearly as much as I care about the lore and the stuff it introduced to the franchise. That matters so much more to me. So yeah, let me know your thoughts. Let me know how you feel. Have you seen the Eternals? You know, did the critical perception on Rotten Tomatoes, did that like, you know, alter the way you went into this? Were you more cautious? Were you looking for flaws? And in the end, do the flaws of this movie bother you, or is it like me where it's like the things it brought with it, the things it added to the franchise, does that matter so much more than the actual like, oh, but the film was messy? It's like, so what? Does, you know what I mean? So what's your thoughts on that? All right, I will see you guys next time. Bye.